Thank you everyone for joining us today. We have a nice sized group. We have about 45 here on the call this morning, and we really appreciate that interaction. This morning, the TAG Learning Collaborative Planning Group has invited Jelan Agnew. She's an LCSW, is an award-winning mindfulness and mental health speaker. She is the recipient of Hartford's Business Journal 40 Under 40 and Connecticut Magazine's 40 Under 40 Award, and is highly rated TEDx speaker. Jelan has 11 plus years of experience as a DBT therapist, adjunct professor, and workshop training facilitator. Founder of Jelan, of Self LLC. She works with individuals and organizations to teach mindfulness as a skill to address post-traumatic burnout, compassion fatigue, and feeling stuck in survival mode. We welcome Jelan this morning, and she's now a co-host, and we'll go ahead and turn it over and share her screen.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Happy Thursday. I just have to say, I just got back from Mexico for a week, so I'm kind of still on the cloud. I'm also going to say, if you were thinking about it, book that flight. And I know somebody was thinking about it. Book the flight. I was there for a week. My skin cleared up. I'm like, what, in this winter time, go on and get some sun. Go on and touch your feet on the earth a little bit. So let me introduce myself a little bit more. My name is Jelan Agnew. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I have been in this field for longer than I care to admit. I know I look young. I'm pushing 40. I have done outpatient, intensive outpatient, residential, school, rehab, you name it, I've done it. I've worked with children, adults, teens. My last position was at the Institute of Living. I worked for 2 years with the 11 to 14-year-olds. And the last 2 years I was there, I worked in the DBT program, intensive outpatient with borderline patients. It was one of my favorite positions. And borderline folks are some of my favorite folks to work with because of the work we did with DBT and what I saw being done with those folks. So I really love doing DBT trainings. I have become DBT. I still do. I have a private practice. It's called Knowledge of Self, which is actually my name spelled backwards. And my business started off as a private practice where I was seeing individuals, families, and teenagers. It is now morphed into more of me doing DBT trainings, doing mindfulness workshops, and also some public speaking. I did a TEDx talk last year on mental health in the Black community about generational trauma. So I really am shifting over from, working with individuals to having these discussions with larger groups and organizations. And that's it about me. Another thing about me is I left the IOL to work for myself 5 years ago. I am not going to be formal at all. This is not going to be a training where I'm an expert. It's going to be a training where I am collaborating with other experts. That's very important to me because I've been in trainings where I'm sitting there looking at the screen like, this person is brilliant, and I can't really follow along with what's going on. I would much rather have participation from you all and for us to have an experience where we can learn from each other. And I think that is about it for today. So just a couple of folks, can you tell me what populations you're working with so that I can get some ideas from my brain to kind of make this more collaborative? So just throw it out there for me.
So my name is Sharon. I am a family reach navigator with McCall Behavioral Health. I work with single dads, single dads, LGBT community, parents, and primary caregivers who are going through substance use and or mental health or in recovery.
Nice. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. Okay. I see in the chat, domestic violence, victims and survivors, adolescent, PHP, IOP, whoever that is, I'm sending you good positive energy through the screen. Okay, so it sounds like we have a range of folks that we are working with, people experiencing homelessness. Okay. So my Residential. Okay, so my experience with DBT started approximately 11 years ago. The latest training I got was approximately 7 years ago. And what we learned about DBT helped me conceptualize the people I work with in a different way. So I got a training in DBT. I have 80 hours. We did 40 hours the first week, and then we went back the second week for an additional 40 hours. It was like 8 to 5, very intense trainings. I trained under Charlie Swenson, who was one of my favorite humans ever. And when I worked in the DBT program, it was really cool because the building I was working in is actually where Marsha Linehan stayed. Marsha Linehan is the creator of DBT. She was institutionalized for 2 years at the Institute of Living and felt that she didn't get the care she needed, so she created DBT. I like DBT because it was created by the quote unquote patient and not some stuffy guy who read a bunch of books, who wears glasses and thinks he's an expert. That's one of my favorite things about DBT. So when I taught DBT in the groups, the clients had a much more connected experience to it because it was coming from someone who shared some of the same symptoms. Another thing I do when I teach DBT is I'm very honest and I try to be as real as possible. That is something that the clients also told me that they appreciated about my delivery. So when we would do group, I would say there was Marsha mist in the air because Marsha was actually on the floor in the same room where we taught DBT. So imagine 16 borderline patient adults doing this so the Marsha mist could enter the group room. It was that kind of experience where we were all connected to what we were going through and sharing. So Dialectical Behavioral Therapy has 4 modules: mindfulness, emotion regulation, distress tolerance, and interpersonal effectiveness. Today, we are going to talk about emotion regulation, which is one module. We got about an hour and a half. I did a 6-hour training on this one module. So there's a lot of information that comes from it, but I'm gonna try to get it into an hour and a half. And this is what I love to do. So if you see me having a nerdy moment or if you see me getting into it, just ride the wave. We're here to have a good time. I know people are here, whether voluntarily or involuntarily. Let's have a good time together. Why not? So one of the biggest things I talk about when I start teaching DBT is I talk about the importance of the shift in our language. Dialectics is 2 seemingly opposite things that can both be true at the same time. So that's a statement like, I love my mom and she gets on my nerves, right? We can have both of those big emotions at the same time, and we have to sit in a dialectic space where we can have room for both of them. That's something really, really important about DBT that our clients really love to talk about, was the dialectics of things. Another piece of the language we have to talk about is, I don't use terms like good and bad. I use terms like effective and ineffective. One thing we do is we put our morals into the work at times. When we put good and bad, we put judgments on things. A lot of DBT is about taking the judgment off of things so we can address what the behavior's functions are and whether they're effective or ineffective. So if I'm having a conversation, I also do a lot of storytelling. So I was having a conversation with a client. The behavior was physical aggression we were working on. She's at the drive-through line and the person hands her a sandwich that is incorrect. Her urge was to throw the sandwich back at the worker, right? We can acknowledge the urge. What this person did instead was drive to the parking lot and throw the sandwich on the ground. So during that conversation, we don't have to use statements like good and bad. We can say, was your behavior effective? Was you hungry after you threw the sandwich on the ground? If yes, then we have an ineffective behavior that now we can talk about, as opposed to you did something bad. That shift in the conversation was the way to engage with a lot of the folks we talk to, including teenagers. So if we can start to address the question that I ask a lot of time with my folks is, what was the function of the behavior? What need were you trying to get met with the behavior? And was it effective? Meaning, was your need met? That is a different conversation than you did something bad, and let's talk about the consequences. So I'm going to stop there a little bit. Somebody tell me what that little shift in language feels like, just in that little bit of time we just talked about it.
I was trying to find a word, what that means. Like they're not being, oh my gosh, I don't know. They're not being attacked. They don't feel like they're being attacked.
Right. It's not an attack, and it's not, I think sometimes when we want to change behaviors, we focus on the behavior itself. But if we shift it back to understanding that 100% of humans, 100% of the time are trying to get their needs met, including us, the experts. So if we can have conversations about needs, we're much less likely to get some of that pushback around, now I feel like you're judging me, or now I feel like you're telling me I'm a bad person. A lot of the people we work with have been pathologized from the time they were young, and they've been giving diagnosis, and they've been shifted to the back of the room or the front of the room or whatever that looks like for them. And they have these titles that are on them. This conversation more is about, tell me about the need. What were you trying to get done? That's important. Another piece of language that we shifted was, instead of using the term manipulate, we use the term get your needs met. I'm sure we've all heard language and conversations about attention seeking and manipulation. Now, the dialectic is, I may be talking about the same person doing the same thing, but if I say you were trying to get your needs met in an ineffective way, how different does that feel to someone who's been told they've been manipulating and attention seeking since they were 15 years old? There's a shift in the trust of the conversation, because we're taking some of the labels off and getting really down into the nitty gritty of what was going on. Needs conversations are very, very helpful. What was your need and what was the function? Now, the clients that I do still have, I only have a handful right now, and I close my doors and keep trying to keep people out, but they keep trying to come in. At this point, my clients are all set with me, because I'll say, all right, now what was the function? So now they come into session and they're like, well, Jelan, I could tell you that the function of my behavior was I was trying to express my frustration because I was frustrated. The conversation starts off differently once we've already exchanged the language and we know what conversation that we're having. The other day, one of my folks told me that she'd slipped back into a target behavior. We went right into what needs aren't being met right now. What did you feel like you needed when you shifted into that? I see a question in the chat. Is it always about needs, or is it about changing perspective? Bethany, if you feel comfortable, can you tell me more about your question?
Yeah, so this actually is not client related. It's sort of related to my kids, right? So on my son's school, he has to go up to the 3rd floor to go to class, right? Like, so tragic. And actually just today, he's like, oh, I have to walk up the stairs. And I'm like, no, you don't have to walk up to the stairs. You get to walk up the stairs. That is a privilege. Right. And he was a little like mad. He was like, oh, really, Mom, do you always have to? And I'm like, yeah, I always have to, because it's important. Because if you go in there with that negative attitude, that's how your day is going to start off. So it may not be a need. And obviously this is not client stuff, but I'm just thinking about, you know, when I talk to clients, it's always, I have to. So I'm just wondering about, does it always have to be centered around a need, or can it just be a simple shift in changing their perspective?
I think that's a wonderful question. And it's a both and.
Okay.
Right? If you try to change someone's perspective who's already in a negative place, they're going to tell you to shut up. And I know, because I get told to shut up at least 10 times a week. That's how I know when I'm really doing good work. I'm like, you told me to shut up. That's great. I think if you're trying to shift from something over here all the way over here, it might be a difficult time. Needs is kind of in the middle. So what is your need? You need to get to class. You need to complete this task so that there isn't a consequence. So if we can attach to the need and then change the perspective, you might have some more buy-in in the conversation.
I love it. Thank you. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. Yep.
Especially with teenagers, you need, you need a consequence, a reward, something
Yeah.
sunny at the end. You really gotta, get the clause in there. But I think it's
Yeah.
a great question, because if you try to change the perspective too early, you have resistance.
Yep. That's why I got, oh, mom, really? Like, yes, really. You get to
Yeah.
walk up the stairs. It's a privilege.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great question.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions or comments so far?
I have a
Yeah.
comment towards Bethany. And I understand I have a teenager as well. And the thing is, it's happened to me before too. I'll admit it, where somebody tries to put me in a perspective. And even though I'm like, okay, whatever, but you know what it does? It sticks to me throughout the day. I think about it. And then when I'm faced again with the situation, I think about what I was just told and how, I put it to the test. So, I mean, although, my teenager does the same thing, they roll their eyes, they roll their
Yeah.
face, their whole entire body gets going, and they're like, whatever. Even my
Yep.
7-year-old does that. But I think it does because they bring it back to you. And, so even though sometimes that's an iffy, like you start off and it's a negative thing and it might just trigger, I
Yeah.
think it still sticks.
Yeah. I hope
Yeah.
it does anyway.
Yeah, that is important. I think reframing is a lot of this work as well. My clients call me the queen of reframe, because they'll tell me a situation and I'm like, so what I'm hearing, they're like, oh my God, here she goes. So what I'm hearing is you've done so well up to this point that now you have more responsibility. Wow. And they don't like it in the moment, but I agree. I think those words do shift. And I think the mindset starts to shift a little bit of there has to be a reframe. There has to be a different perspective. Another question I ask my folks is, what are you putting your focus on right now? That's not saying change your thought patterns or think positive. It's merely asking, what are you putting your focus on right now? Do you have the ability to put your focus somewhere else for the next 2 minutes at least? Help shifting the focus or the awareness is a piece also. And obviously it takes, after you've done some work, then you can have these conversations. Another thing with DBT is we don't say but, we say and. One thing when I was still working in the office, I'd write the word but real big on the board, cross it out, and. Anytime somebody says but in the group, my hand goes up, their eyes roll, they start to shift, but then in the milieu, and okay, we're getting into the language, because with the dialectic, again, we want to leave room for both seemingly opposite things. Once we put the but in there, we're not giving credit to either side of it. The and allows for different perspectives and different conversations. So a lot of and happening within the shift in language. Questions, comments on the shift in language? Who feels like they can use this in their own personal lives? Right? Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so shift in language is first. The next piece that we talk about when we teach DBT is the biosocial theory. I'm going to get into it very briefly. I'm going to try to share my screen. Please don't make fun of me. Oh, I also sing too in sessions, which my clients are sick of me. It's fine. All right, so here we are trying to make this big. Okay, hold please. I am struggling.
It'll probably work if you go back in and just click the green button to make it your full screen.
Click to, okay. Let's see, go back. Thank you, whoever that was. So click. I'm trying to.
Yep, upper left-hand corner, just to make it your full screen.
Upper left hand. You all are judging me silently. I can feel it.
No, we're supporting you. You are just on it.
Thank you. Okay.
No judgment. That little green, red, yellow, green on the top of that page.
Red, yellow. This.
There you go.
Oh,
There you go.
it's not, this is in the way. All right. Apologies all. I'm gonna try this one more time. Okay. All right, here we are. Apologies. Biosocial theory. This is something that was really, really important. This is also something that we would teach directly to clients. At times, it would help them to see things in a different perspective and feel a little bit more comfortable with what it is that they were struggling with here. And this is general handout 5 in the DBT manual, which is a Googleable PDF. It's also at the very top of the chat. I did put a link to the worksheets that I will be going over with you all. So this is the biosocial theory. The question is, why do I have so much trouble controlling my emotions and actions? So the theory is that in our folks who I like to say have magical minds, as opposed to talking about mental health diagnosis, I call it magical, and I talk about superpowers that a lot of our folks have. So when you have a magical mind, you are more sensitive to emotional stimuli. You can detect them in the environment more readily than other people. So you experience emotions much more often, and the emotions seem to hit out of the blue. There are also more intense emotions, and they're more long lasting. The reason this was really helpful to our folks was because it talks about this piece being biological. It talks about this piece being a part of the person's brain as opposed to something negative or a consequence or something else. It really helped the experience to be one that was experienced by more people than just by that specific person. So if you have a conversation and you say to someone, you are more sensitive to the emotional stimuli in the room, you are more sensitive than other people, it takes it away from I'm more out of control or crazy or whatever term it was that was being used previously. And it's like, I'm more sensitive, so that I take in a lot more than the people around me. I'm having a different experience than some of the other folks around me. That's another piece of it. The emotions are longer lasting and they experience more often. So there's an emotional vulnerability. The next piece that we talk about it is the impulsivity, finding it very hard to restrain the behaviors, doing things without thinking that get them in trouble, and the behaviors seem to come out of nowhere. This too can be biological. Again, it's taking some of that blame off of the person we're talking about and helping them understand that this is just the way you're wired. Some of it is the way your brain is wired. Feeling that their moods can get in the way of achieving goals and feeling that they cannot control the behaviors. So we talk about impulsivity. Another big piece of this theory is about the social environment. An invalidating social environment can make it very hard to regulate emotions. We talk a lot about invalidating environments. The invalidating environment doesn't seem to understand your emotions. It tells you your emotions are invalid, weird, wrong, or bad. It ignores your emotional reactions and does nothing to help you. It may say things like, stop being a baby, stop crying. And it also, the environment can reinforce the behaviors as well. So when the person has an out of control behavior, the environment reinforces it by meeting that need. So that person now learns that that behavior is how they get their needs met. Often people who invalidate are doing the best that they can, and they may not know how to validate, and they may be afraid that if they validate emotions, you will be more emotional, not less. So this is a conversation that we have as well of your environment was invalidating, and that's what we throw the and in. Your caretaker may not have known how to validate your emotions. That doesn't mean we take responsibility away from the caretaker, but we can acknowledge that they didn't have the skills to validate that emotion. Another piece here, a sentence that folks found comfort in is, it may just be a poor fit between you and your social environment. You may be a tulip in a rose garden. So this is the conversation that we'd have with folks when they first came into our program, helping them understand the biological piece, helping them understand how their environment may have contributed to where they are now, especially this piece about reinforcing the out of control behaviors. So give me some thoughts about the biosocial theory. Has anyone had this conversation with clients?
I'm just curious with the biological aspect of it. Do you find that more clients will use that as more of an excuse than anything else? And if you do, how do you steer them in a different direction to kind of give them that positive?
Great question. I can see clients who have attempted to use that as a way to rationalize behaviors. The and in that is, okay, you have a sensitivity, and how do we work together to have you have more effective behaviors? A big piece of it is that kind of Dr. Phil, what he used to say of, how's that working out for you? How is your current behavior pattern? How's that working out for you? So yes, you have these superpowers, right? Yes, you have a sensitivity. Yes, you can sense more than people around you and feel it more intensely. And you're here because we need to work on those behaviors because they have been causing consequences for you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Anybody else talk or have any similar conversations with clients, and what was some of the feedback?
I have. I've had that conversation a lot, and the reaction, it's been pretty consistent, which is, oh, you mean I'm not crazy? Oh,
right.
That's what's going on. Oh, that puts language to the experience. I don't think I've ever had any other reaction, and it doesn't matter the person, the population, whether they were incarcerated yesterday or, in treatment, not in treatment. I've never had any other reaction that I can think of.
Yeah. And when we talk about our environments being invalidating, this can be a validating experience for someone who has been told they were crazy or whatever labels they have. This can be validating them of, oh, I knew there was something different. I knew that, okay, now I'm starting to understand what's going on with me. That's the experience I've had with clients as well, of it being comforting. Of one of the major pieces of feedback we got from folks is, why wasn't we learning this in middle school? Like, I guarantee you that algebra that we learned, I guarantee you these skills are much more useful to me, would have been much more useful to me as a kid. And the biosocial theory is included in that. I wish I would have known that differently. A lot of the work that we do is we want to validate the client's emotions. And we can validate their emotions without validating the behavior. We'll get into that. We'll talk about how we start to separate that out, because what happens to our folks is their emotions and behaviors have been linked. So they feel invalidated because all of the conversations they have are about their behaviors. But once we separate the emotion from the behavior, we can validate the emotion. And then we can talk about the behaviors in a different conversation. So a lot of the work that we will be doing is validating the emotions, because in these invalidating environments, let's say we have a sensitive client who cried all the time as a kid and a teenager and in those things. And the response is, stop crying. You're dramatic. You're sensitive. What are you doing? So if that's the feedback I've been getting from my environment the whole time, I don't even really know how to separate my emotions from my behaviors, because the behavior is crying. And every time I cry, people tell me not to cry. Think about it. When we raise kids and a baby falls, what do we say to the child? Don't cry. We're learning that emotion suppression from a very, very young age. So to come in and talk to someone and they're like, tell me about your emotions, or tell me about what that feels like, it's a completely different experience. It's a validating experience in some ways for a lot of people.
Do you think that, you know, coming from a family with labeled, you know, bipolar disorder, and we've heard it all our sister's life. We have one sister that's been labeled. And do you think that also has a part to do with this, with how people feel about themselves? Like, I know I did at one point when I became, when I, you know, started my recovery 15 years ago. I know that 2 years after my recovery, I still was feeling sad and like a light switch. So then in my head, I'm like, wow, am I bipolar too? Am I like my sister? You know, so hearing my parents, all my sister's life saying, excusing her behavior for bipolar disorder, in our head, we're like, wait a minute, is that why we are like this? So is that considered also?
Yeah, absolutely. And in our field, a lot of people who give diagnosis don't do a good job of explaining what that means. But we know those labels that you get, that means it's the end, or it's, you know, there's no hope, right? So when you put something like bipolar or borderline, which, you know, even within the field, the eyebrows go up at that. Absolutely, you start to understand that there's something wrong, as opposed to you have an emotional sensitivity. I think shifting from a diagnosis to I have an emotional sensitivity, it's like you have an allergy. It registers differently in the brain. So absolutely, when we use the titles, you start to shift into that, and then the person automatically has this kind of cloud over them, or just there are ways that we don't want to deal with that person because of that diagnosis. So absolutely, definitely. Especially if you got it young, when you were young, you know, that goes with you throughout. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. One thing I shared, and I'm very open. If you check out my website, you'll see my story. But I struggle myself with depression and anxiety. So one of the things that I talked about in my groups is when you have an emotional sensitivity, it's important not to feel like that diagnosis is like a death sentence or the end of your human experience. It's important to understand that you can, if you think about it, I can detect subtle emotional changes in the environment. Is that not a superpower? Like, am I not light years ahead for that? And instead, it gets passed down of there's something wrong with you. So it's the shift in the lens. I'm a big shifter in the lens. I'm a big reframer. But even within those diagnoses, if we can talk more about the sensitivity, then we're talking about the same things, but we're using different language. Language is very, very important, especially in this field. Especially in pop culture, where everybody's a narcissist now and everybody's gaslighting and everybody's a TikTok therapist at this point. It's really, really important that we understand language and shift the kinds of conversations that we're having. Questions or comments about what we're talking about, the biosocial piece or the labeling? All right. So we talked about the biosocial and we talked about language. Those are the two key points before we get into some of the skills themselves. So the next piece we are going to go into is called the model of emotions. And I'm looking to the side. Anybody else old school and like a paper and pen and a notepad? Like, I know we have these computers and stuff, but give me a notepad because we need notepads and pens. All right, so I am going to share my screen again and attempt not to do what I did before. I'm going to go to the whiteboard and we are going to talk about the model of emotions. As soon as I can get rid of the chat screen. Are we all seeing the chat screen? Yes. Boom. There it is. Perfection. This is the model of emotions. Another thing I would like to, and I'm going to draw this, and I want you all to not judge me. Here we go. Everybody's seen that thermometer thing, right? Where we rate our emotions. I would suggest that we use emotion regulation from a 1 to a 5. The skills for the 5 to 10 is distress tolerance. That's another module. So we are using emotion regulation in 1 to 5. If you have a skill with your clients, that's really important because a lot of the emotion regulation skills take some kind of problem solving skills. We don't want to problem solve between 6 and 10. Between 6 and 10, we're only worried about getting back under 5. That's really important. So if a client comes to me dysregulated and they need help problem solving, we're not going to go right into the problem solving. We're going to get down to a 5 or a 4 before we go into problem solving. I don't know about anybody else. When I'm at a 9, the last thing I need to be doing is trying to solve problems because most likely I'm creating new ones in that situation. Okay, so we have the please excuse my spelling, precipitating event. We have the emotion. We have the behavior. And between the event and the emotion, we have an interpretation. This is important because a lot of folks think we go from the event to the behavior. The interpretation, which leads to the emotion, is much more important than the event itself. In fact, the behavior and the event are sometimes not connected. All of the work happened in the interpretation and in the emotion. Now, let me give you an example of what this might look like in a situation. So the precipitating event was, I moved to Connecticut. I moved from Brooklyn, New York to Manchester, Connecticut in 1996. And if you know anything about diversity, it was a big culture shock for me. Big culture shock for me. So our precipitating event is I get to class and my teacher pats me on my head and says, "Atta girl, you made it to class on time." That's the precipitating event. My interpretation of that event, the only time I'd ever seen anyone pat something on the head that way was a dog or a pet. So I interpreted that to mean something inappropriate and something maybe racist, okay? Because I'm coming from diversity into being the only Black person in my classroom and possibly on the whole floor of the building I'm in. So white man teacher pats me on my head and says, "Atta girl, you made it to class on time." I interpret that to mean he thinks I'm a pet. He's petting me. He's tapping me. I don't know what's going on. So my emotion is based on my interpretation of the event, not the event itself. I'm going to say that again. My emotion was based on my interpretation of the event and not the event itself. So the emotion I had after that event was confused, sad, and I think I got all the way to angry because in my mind, this white man just patted me on my head. What was the behavior? My behavior was to go inward. It's the first day of school. I don't really know what's going on, but I can tell you there was a lot of emotion building up in my body. In my mind, I was going to call the NAACP. I was going to call Martin Luther King's grandchild. I was going to call all my cousins from Brooklyn to come up here and beat this teacher up. And then what happens directly after that is a little white girl comes into the class. The teacher pats her on the head and says, "Atta girl, you made it to class on time." I love telling this story because it was all based on my interpretation. It was all based on my worldview, my history, my trauma, and everything else I had dealt with, and nothing to do with the event itself. So a lot of the work I do with my clients is about working on their interpretations. So when we're talking about interpretations, we're talking about worldview. We're talking about trauma. We're talking about culture. We're talking about language. We're talking about education. We're talking about nationality. This is super. I wish I knew how to move this. You guys just go with my chaos today, okay? So when we speak about the interpretation here, we're having conversations about what already exists in my mind and not what's actually happening in reality. Another big piece of what happens with the interpretation is cognitive distortions. If I believe the world is bad, if I believe negative things happen to me, if I'm mental filtering to only take in the negative things that are going on, if I believe everybody's out to get me, my interpretation of events are going to be way different than what's actually going on in my environment. We'd spend group upon group upon group just on interpretations, just on cognitive distortions. Another story I'll tell, it's a little bit inappropriate, but it's almost Friday and everybody's here for my chaos. So we're in group because we asked, one of the things we did too is we asked clients for examples so we can map this out on the board. If you have access to a board and you can map out some of the behaviors, it's really, really helpful as well. So in our next example, we had a client who told her dad, she wanted to be a stripper. Dad says to her, well, if you become a stripper, you got to get out of my house. So based on dad's response, what are some of our interpretations of dad's response? And just throw them out there.
Maybe he feels disrespected for the family.
Yep. What else? What are some other interpretations?
Maybe he was trying to protect her.
Trying to protect her. Yep.
Embarrassment.
Embarrassment.
Thought he raised his daughter better.
Yep. Raised her better. Yep. What else? What are some other interpretations we can have based on dad's response?
A feeling of him not doing his job.
Like maybe he failed.
As a parent.
Yep.
In the chat is saying disappointed, unsafe, failure.
Got it.
That's in the chat.
So this is how my client interpreted this event. Dad felt disrespected. He wanted to protect her. He felt embarrassed. So what happens directly after the interpretation is the emotion based on the interpretation. So my client, what might have been some emotions my client felt after her dad said this to her?
Anger.
Anger.
Sad.
Sadness, yeah.
Rejection.
Rejection,
Judged.
yeah. Judged. Absolutely. And these are all of the emotions that she felt. So her behavior, one of my lovelies, her behavior was she threw a chair at dad, right? Threw a chair.
Runs away.
Right. So her behavior now was physical aggression based on her interpretation and her emotion. After she throws chair, after her and dad de-escalate, dad says to her, strippers make a lot of money. I was just saying you wouldn't need to live here anymore. So I love telling this story because I just took you all on an emotional journey. Meanwhile, dad's having a conversation about finances. And
I was just thinking about that.
Yeah, right. So this is why if you can map these behaviors out, we can start to separate the interpretation from the emotion and then the behavior. What we want to do, I'm going to clear this, clean it up a little bit. So event, interpretation, emotion, behavior. So if you have a place where you can map this out on your board with your client, I would highly, highly suggest it. If they have a behavior, if they engage in a behavior that they're working on, I would map it out, help them map it out so that they can start to break down what these things look like. In our stage of DBT, we were in crisis mode most of the time. So when we are in crisis mode, we are trying to intervene here. So if we can help slow down the response between the emotion and the behavior, that's very, very helpful. At the same time, the more work we do back here in these sections, the less work we'll have to do with the behaviors. So in between the interpretation and the emotion, you have body sensations. And in between the emotion and the behavior, we have action urges. This is important because if we can start to connect all of these things, we'll start to have less conversations about quote unquote bad behavior and more conversations about, tell me how you interpreted that. Tell me about what was going on for you in that moment that you arrived at that emotion. The reason why it's so important to talk to our folks about body sensations is because we don't know what emotions feel like in our bodies. Most of us. I had a session recently where a client is describing to me, I got nauseous and my head hurt and I started sweating. She thought she ate something bad. She was having an anxiety attack. So if we can start to help our folks understand what the emotions feel like in their bodies, then we can start putting language on the emotions. If I understand, when I get upset, I get a tingling in my wrist. I don't know how my wrists are connected to anything, but I know if I get a tingling in my wrist, I'm having the emotion of anger. So if we can start to help our clients understand where they feel things in their bodies, we're shifting the conversation. The first moment I get a twinge in my wrist, if I can put a skill in place then, as opposed to when my emotion's at 9, I'm going to be much more successful. And this is why mindfulness is such an important piece of DBT, because it asks our clients to be present in the moment and start to get more comfortable within their own bodies. And again, when we're working with trauma, there has to be some work around helping them be safe in their body first. But if we can do that and help them understand what emotions feel like, these conversations will start to shift. The event happened, and immediately I felt something in my stomach. We can have conversations about every time you feel something in your stomach. And then sometimes I give my clients homework as well. Go back into your life and notice when you feel that flutter in your stomach. Notice who you're around. Notice what time of the day it is. Notice what's going on around you. Those things are so, so important. And here's the tea of all the tea. Vulnerabilities are going to be a huge part of this conversation. So vulnerabilities are going to be, did you eat? Did you sleep? Did you take your medication? Was it an anniversary? Is this a day every year that you feel extra emotion? All of these things are going to be very important. Did you have an argument? Vulnerabilities are going to be anything that increase your emotional sensitivity. Did I spell this wrong? Now, let me tell you, argument. Let me tell you about how many times I've talked to my client about behaviors and I say, hold on. Let's go all the way back over here to the beginning. Did you have breakfast? No. How much sleep did you get? About an hour and a half. So now we're having a conversation about your physical self and not about the lady that looked at you funny in CVS. It really, really helps to tease out what's physical, what's emotional, what's worldview, and what's actually happening in that behavior. So as you're having these conversations, and again, if you can map these out on a board, that's even better. They've been talking about their behaviors since they were in middle school. That's all anybody ever wants to talk about. If we could have conversations around, okay, do this for me. Eat well and sleep. Let's work on your eating and sleeping habits and see if anything changes within your behaviors. Let's see if getting up an hour earlier so you can take care of your needs, let's see if that eradicates any of these behaviors. A big piece of it is we're not paying attention to our physical selves. We're just getting up and moving. You know, well, I noticed I had an argument with my boyfriend last night, then I didn't sleep well, and then I forgot to eat breakfast, and then I had to fight with the person. Conversations about vulnerabilities are really, really going to help you narrow down what's going on with folks. Let me hear some comments, some feedback. I see a lot of head shaking. I want to know what you're thinking about here of this model of emotions.
I love this.
Yeah.
This actually happened to me this morning without getting too personal. I went through that exact stage, the event, the interpretation, the body sensations, the emotion, the behavior. So this could have came for a perfect time for me today. So
Yep.
I love that now I can relate this to clients and other people to help them. It's huge. It's huge on changing your behavior. Just understanding these little events right here and breaking it down. You know, it'll help somebody to realize that they're not a bad person. They're just going through things and it's okay and it's fine and it's safe to talk about it. So thank you very much. Great stuff today.
Yeah.
Well,
I think
this is also on a daily basis. Like if we work with people every day, and before I came to work for the village, my career as a server for 27 years, it's the same exact thing. And I had to learn throughout the years that when a customer, a client comes in and they're nasty, mad, grumpy, And they, hi, how are you? And they're like, coffee. And you're just like, okay, yeah, that's right. So I've learned to not react. And a lot of my newer staff would tell me, how is it that you're dealing with this person? Every time they come in, they yell at me. And I said, well, first of all, you get them their coffee because you know something happened in the event of the day that made them this way. They didn't wake up feeling this way. So, and they're like, well, how do you even put up with that? And I said, well, you have to change. The only person you can change is you. If you're going to give them what they're giving you back, it's going to be bad. They obviously came in to have a nice meal. So let's give it to them. It doesn't matter that he gave you or she gave you the death stare, the give me the coffee, or, you know, I need water. Can I get a lemon? Then you know what, you do it, and you don't change your server ways. You're nice to them. By the end of their meal, they're happy, they're full, and they'll come back and ask for you, or they'll come back and say that server treated me good. Even, I mean, it just, to me, we go through this on an everyday basis when someone's pushing you at the line at the Walmart because they just want to be mean. You know, it's not you, it's them. So how we react is in all of this. And I also take into consideration that they must have went through something during the course of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. That's important. I think that's an important point, and it's also an important point to remember as we navigate the world, that this is what's happening for people, and just understanding and not taking things so personal. I was very excited. I finished one book, and why that's exciting, because I'm midway through 7 books. So I finished one book, and one of the laws is not to take things so personal. A lot of what is going on for people is going on for them. And it's important not to pick up other people's energy. I know people talk about matching energy, but do you want to pick that up and take that on? I don't know that I want to. Jennifer, I see your hand.
Yes, good morning. I love exactly what you're saying. Sorry, I can't show my face this morning, but what you're saying is so realistic that as managers and supervisors, we can't only look at the client with these situations. We have to go back and through supervision. Sometimes we have to have this sheet for our staff: vulnerability, how much sleep they're getting, how many shifts they're doing, what are they reacting, because a lot of times also when staff is having complicated problems with the clients, are they getting enough sleep? Are they eating properly? Are they working too much? Are they not taking care of themselves and doing the self-care? So I think this is also a very, very, very good tool we can use through supervision with our staff, and also in staff meetings with our staff, in order to provide a more positive and more acceptable space for our staff. Because although they're working with clients and they are professional, they still have personal lives. They still go through vulnerability. They still go through disappointments. And many times staff brings it to the facility, and it complicates the relationship between the staff and the clients.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And
that's what I love about what Jennifer just said. I'm sorry, Jelan. For the village, our supervisor makes sure that we are also at a, you know, that we're self-caring, that we are okay, that our load is not overloading. And that's one thing that I do appreciate working at the village, you know, in the REACH program, is that our supervisor does exactly that.
Yeah. And that is another reason that I love DBT, is because it's not just for our clients, right? These are all things we can talk about. You know, I think it was Crystal that was saying, like, just this very morning, I went through this whole process. We're going through this whole process at least 100 times a day. So it's really important that we work on our own interpretations of things. Another reason I love this is because now we can start to separate our emotion from our behavior. Now we can start to have 2 separate conversations about the emotion and the behavior, so that we can take the opportunity to validate what that client was feeling, and also say, but your behavior, not but, and your behavior was ineffective. Your emotion, very, very valid. Your behavior, ineffective. Now, I can think from a client's perspective, from somebody who's been hearing about how bad my behavior is, it just feels like a different conversation to say, oh, wait, so my emotion was right. Oh, so I can feel upset. I have the permission to feel upset. Oh, okay, because everybody's been telling me to calm down for 20 years. I can feel upset. But what you're saying is my behavior is what's leading to the consequence, not my emotion. That is one of the biggest things. We need to help our clients understand that it is not your emotion that gets you into trouble. It's the physical manifestation of the emotion, which is the behavior.
And Jelan, Rosemary here, and I think it's interesting what you're saying, because when we then talk in the clinical level, when you then create that alliance with your client, right, in validating their emotions, you have this process kind of when it goes down to slow down and the action, the urge, the behavior and all that, it's much easier because the trust was already established. Right. And so I see this in the clinical level all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. It teases things out in a way that you can have conversations about it. And so I'll tell another story. So one of my little babies, a teenager, teacher tells her to shut up. Right. So the event is a teacher tells you to shut up. Interpretation, right? I'm looking at faces. Everybody's like, oh, no, ma'am. Right? We're not doing that. What's the teacher's name? Somebody said that in training. What's the teacher's name? I'm like, this is 10 years ago. That's a grown up now. So, teacher tells the child to shut up, right? Our interpretations are all over the place. The emotion, upset, disappointed, frustrated, maybe feeling unsafe. The behavior was this child threw a coat rack at the teacher. I said to this child, why didn't you just throw a coat? Like, why the rack? Threw a coat rack at the teacher. So now the child is in my office looking at me like, but she told me to shut up. I don't even know. And she's going into her teenage thing. And I'm like, if her eyes roll one more time. So we're having the conversation and I can say to her, your emotion was very, very valid. I'm upset with your teacher also. That was not okay. And your behavior was very, very ineffective because it got you a consequence. Separate conversations. So now I can say, validate. I'm sorry that happened to you. And now you have to go do a repair for that behavior. Because what we're not going to do is be throwing stuff at people and think that's going to be okay as you become older and you're an adult. We validate first, and then we start to shift the behavior. Another
right. And then the question is, was that behavior effective anyway? You know?
Right. Mm-hmm. Yep. And then again, like you're saying, now we can talk about effective and ineffective, because now we can say, what was your need?
Right,
and then we can say, was there another way to get your need met in a more effective way? The language is softening. The client is talking about it. They're talking about their emotions. Now, maybe we can even come up with a plan for what happens with the teacher the next day, because we broke it down, as opposed to this.
Right.
Wrong, bad, this, that doesn't get us anywhere. Another piece here that is important to look at is your action urges. As we slow this process down between the emotion and the behavior, we can help our clients understand that their action urges are okay too. I have the urge twice a week to drop kick somebody in the forehead. Twice a week, right? Do I engage in that behavior? Not anymore. Not in my 30s, maybe in my 20s, a little bit. The urges are important to talk about. The urges are important to acknowledge, because what we also don't want to do is like, you shouldn't be having urges like that. Why are you violent? We don't want to get into that. That's not important. What's important is that what is your urge? And we'll get into a skill that goes with this. What is your urge? I want you to do the exact opposite of that urge. And that's when the skill starts to come into play. And that skill is actually called opposite action. So when I go into the skills, I'll talk about where we put the skills into this process. But the action urges are very important. The action urge is another way to validate your client. Because again, these clients have been getting bad behavior. If your client can discuss, well, I wanted to slap her in her face, if she can have a candid conversation with you about that, and instead I chose to do XYZ, we can still validate the urge. Now, some feedback I got from teachers, I did this at one of the correct schools, and the teachers were saying, we don't want them walking around talking about their action urges. That part is true. Because the teenagers will say, well, I didn't slap her. I just told her I had the action urge to slap her. That's not what we said in group. That's not, we didn't say that in the group. Stop playing, right? So we talking about action urges in safe spaces. But we want to be able to identify and validate the action urge. Because we all have urges as adults to do things that we don't necessarily need to do or that have a consequence. If the environment is safe enough, we can talk about the urges as well. Somebody talk to me about action urges. How do we feel about validating the urges as well?
I'm learning. I'm learning to step back, and think about, because I'm so used to reacting and defending myself that it just, now that you're learning all these things, and I have a little 7-year-old who has difficulties with swelling of the brain. So her emotions amplify 3 times. So her behavior is 3 times and I also have a few clients where their behavior, and I see the same actions happening, it amplifies 3 times, where in a normal setting, if you started yelling at me, I'm going to yell back. So coming into this field, I've learned that she's yelling at me because she's aggravated, she's confused, she doesn't know any better. So I'm learning this whole process, and it's a good learning experience for me.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Another piece in what you're talking about too is our folks being dysregulated. One of the feedbacks that we got from our borderline patients was they wanted the name changed of the diagnosis. Borderline sounds like you have more than one personality. They said they'd rather it be called emotion dysregulation disorder. That also shifts the way we see things in the conversations that we're having. My emotions are dysregulated because I'm so sensitive to my own and other people's in the environment. And another piece I want to bring up is shame. We have a lot of conversations about shame. If I can share with you my emotion and my action urge without being shamed, I'm much more likely to process through that action urge so we can start talking about some alternatives. One skill, and this is not in emotion regulation, this is in distress tolerance, it's called alternate rebellion. It's where we talk about what was your need. My need was to push a little bit of the envelope, to rustle feathers a little bit around me, to make people look at me in a different way. So instead of having a behavior with a consequence, how can we have some alternate rebellion? So one example of that is, it was one time we were moving from one office to the other. And you know how clients feel about stability and doing the same thing over and over, a routine. We were switching buildings and they were having a hard time with the shift. So one of our folks came in with their shirt inside out, with their tie on backwards, with a wild colored crazy coat. And they said, this is my alternate rebellion. I can physically see that he's letting us know that he is uncomfortable with this change, uncomfortable with this routine shift, uncomfortable with this, and he doesn't have the negative consequences from the behavior. So when we get into action urges, we can start to talk about some alternatives. How can you get on the staff's nerves without creating a consequence for yourself? And it was beautiful to see. How can you argue with that? And it was beautiful because they had the DBT manual and they just walked around like pointing at action, at alternate rebellion all day. And we understood the emotion, right? We understood the interpretation, but the behavior didn't have the consequence. In that state, we can say that was an effective behavior because we still understood that they didn't like the change, but we didn't have to get into the consequences. And that's why I love DBT, because it breaks things down in a way that is understandable and digestible. Anything else about model of emotions? I think that is it for model of emotions. Somebody tell me how you feel about model of emotions. I know the first time I saw this, my brain like did an explosion thing. And I was like, again, in middle school, this would have been much more helpful for me than half of the things I learned there. Someone give me some feedback or some thoughts about this model of emotions.
I think it's wonderful, the model of emotion. I mean, even though we go back and we say, I wish this was in school, you know, I think we've all dealt with middle school, you know, elementary school the same way. Buck up, deal with it. And as adults, you know, we're walking around bucking up and dealing with it, that it becomes mental, you know, like mental health, mental illness, that, you know, but it's something that we can take with us and also pass it on. So, you know, being in this situation, I'm gonna take this with me, and I'm gonna spread it, and I'm going to teach people and tell them, you know, I'm talking from experience too, because this all brings back a slew of memories.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I enjoyed it.
And I love the piece of the oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I love the piece of the diagnostics piece that you're talking about when you say borderline personality. Seems like everything's so stigmatized, closed. That's the end of it. Instead of emotionally regulated, I have something that I can do to regulate myself, even without being linguistic. I think that is a little bit of a hope in there. I love that piece.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I agree with, you know, why are we not teaching this in school? Why do we not have a social skills class that teaches skills that could really be useful in life?
Yeah, absolutely. That would be very, very useful. You know, a social skills class where you learn, one, what your emotions even are. Like, what's all that noise happening in my body? Now, what I will say is that the younger generation, they're starting to get some of these emotional lessons within their what they're learning. Like, I have a godson, he's 7 now. And he said the other day, I'm frustrated. And he like did that and he walked away. And I'm like, I just learned the word frustrated when I was 28. Like, what do you mean you're frustrated at 6 or 7? It was wonderful to see, but it's good that the language is starting to happen now, because actually identifying the emotions in your body is something that a lot of people don't do or have the time to do, especially in our very, very go, multitask, get over it culture. It's kind of a different experience with that. Anybody else on the model of emotions?
Nicole Milner here. I just want to say that I love that this is a visual, because a lot of people are visual learners. I love that it's concrete and it solves the mystery between a trigger and the behavior in like a way that I can see, or that anyone can see. And it's just like, I feel like it just teases out all that mystery that happens in between that we don't really pay attention to.
Yep. I coined a very clinical term. I said this all in here is all of the gobbledygook, right? This is where the magic happens. This is all a gobbledygook. What we've talked about before DBT is events and behaviors. The gobbledygook is where the good stuff is. And if you can get down in here, you're starting to map out other issues in your life too. This is not just for one specific behavior, because most likely your interpretations are driving your perception of everything. So I have one person that I'm working with who's doing phenomenal right now. And they said to me, when you gonna write your book? But they also said to me, we didn't spend a lot of time talking about behavior. And I said, because 90% of the time is not about the actual behavior itself. Because even if you fix a behavior, and if you fix a behavior that somebody's struggling with, it's going to manifest somewhere else if we don't get down to the bottom of what is the driving force for the beliefs that are in place. So I love how I feel like this is kind of getting into the interpretations is a deep dive into the core beliefs of what's going on with the person, as opposed to trying to cure the symptoms. The behaviors are just the symptoms. And what we know about symptoms is when you cure one, if you haven't addressed the dis-ease, it manifests in a different way. And I feel the same way about this process.
Can I just say that I will be practicing the turning the but into an and a lot. I am such a, I don't like the word but. And my brother and I go back and forth all the time. And as soon as he butts me, I said, don't you butt me. Don't you butt me. Right. And then we started to switch it up to however, you know, he'd be like, however, but now I like it because even however is the same as a but. So that and, oh, I can't wait to use that and.
And is good. The and is good. And
I love it.
And it's annoying to people. I find that sometimes being annoying is effective as a clinician, because my clients always say, Jelan, I heard your voice in my head before I engaged in that behavior. And I'm like, that's great.
I love it. You know, when you're in that deep, heated conversation and you start throwing out those buts, it could only intensify it. And, you know, just having that playfulness between the two of us and saying, don't you butt me, it kind of de-escalates the whole situation. And yeah, I'm going to come back with him now with this and he's going to be like, you need to stop.
Don't try to DBT me. That's what my family and friends say to me. Don't try to use that DBT stuff on me. Another big and that we talk about with our clients is like, I'm doing the best that I can and there's room for my improvement.
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
I'm a masterpiece and I'm fixing what's going on in my life. It's the dichotomy, it's the dialectic. And if I ever meet Marsha, I'm a huge fan of just organizing this information in a way where it's very breakdownable and teachable. All right, so that's model of emotions. I'm gonna leave it up for another second or two so we can screenshot. And then I'm going to get into a couple of skills because we got the theory, we got the understanding. So I'm going to teach a couple skills in the last 25, 30 minutes. Questions, comments, concerns?
I just have one question. I know this is being recorded. Where exactly would I be able to find this? Because I know I'm going to want to watch this multiple times.
Good question. Sheila, do we have a answer for that? She's still here.
Excuse me. Hi there. Yeah, it's going to be edited and then placed on the Consortium YouTube channel.
Awesome. Thank you.
So go to the YouTube channel. There's just about every tag in WSBIC and the workforce development. There's so many resources there that you guys can just click on and take a look at.
By any chance, would you happen to know what it would be titled?
When I can check with Kay, but when Kay does that, they usually put on that it's the Trauma and Gender Learning Collaborative Initiative. And then we'll see Jelan's name and picture in the thumbnail.
Great. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome.
All right. Are we all still together? We got about a half an hour left. I appreciate the participation. And so I'm going to do, I think we'll have time for 3 skills. So I will start with There's me singing again. Let's see. All right. I'm going to start with the please skills. Hold, please. I think I just closed it out. All right. All right, here we go. Please don't judge me, you all. I swear I had this down before we started.
I blame it on Max. I really don't like Max at all.
Yeah, it's not letting me be great
Yeah.
here. All right. Okay. We're going to share. All right. Please skills. Can everyone see the please skills? The reason I'm starting with the please skills is because everyone in this training today needs to do better with these. And how do I know? Because we're all therapists and helpers, and a lot of therapists and helpers have a hard time taking care of themselves. The please skills are going to be very important for the vulnerabilities piece that we were talking about. Please skills is taking care of your mind by taking care of your body. So the L in please is physical illness, to go to the doctor when necessary and take medications as prescribed. A lot of the times when we map out a behavior, I'll start with the please skills. I'll go down each one. 90% of the time, we need to do work on these skills as opposed to trying to address the behavior directly. E, balance eating, not eating too much or too little, staying mindful throughout the day. A is we are avoiding mood-altering substances. S is we are getting balanced sleep. And E, we are getting exercise. My suggestion, if you are going to map out a behavior, start here. This will tell us a lot about what was going on physically within that person's body before the emotions got into it. Who needs to work on their please skills for themselves? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Even today, I can probably do a poll of who had breakfast, who woke up on time, who moved their body within the last 24 hours. These are really, really important things for us and our clients as well. A lot of what I talk about, I don't really talk about self-care. I feel like it's too popularized. I talk about self-compassion. And it is a very self-compassionate thing to do to take care of your physical self. I don't think we acknowledge how the mind-body connection is so connected that sometimes we think we're being irritable because we're having a mental issue when we haven't taken care of our physical selves. When I had an office, I would hang it up on the wall. And whenever someone would come in, they engage in the behavior, I just point at the please skills. Did I get told to shut up a lot? Yes, I did. Was I on point? Yes, I was. Sleep, eating, mood-altering substances, a lot of stories start there. Even if I had a drink last night and that impacted my day the next day, even if it's the next day or some days after. So really going down this list will also help to tease that out as well. I had a client I was working with who didn't notice we mapped out the behavior enough to when we said, every time you drink the night before, you engage in a target behavior the next day. Now we're starting to connect things other than the behavior. It's never about the behavior. It's always about the factors that play into the behavior. Plea skills is where you start when you're starting to work with folks on these behaviors. Questions or comments about the plea skills? All right. That is one skill that we use in emotion regulation. Another skill that we use in emotion regulation is check the facts. The reason we want to check the facts is we want to ask our clients, did your emotion match the event? Did your emotion match what was going on in that situation? And again, we would map this, we'd map the behavior out, and then we would go down this checklist. So the first question we ask, well, if we look here at the top, the events, the thoughts, and the emotions, it talks about the map we just made. It talks about how we map these things out. Is it a fact? Is it something that I can witness through my 5 senses? So the first question in check the facts is, what emotion do I want to change? What emotion's coming up as a result of this event? Number 2 is important. What is the event prompting my emotion? Describe the facts that you observe through your senses. Challenge judgments, absolutes, and black and white descriptions. So when I have someone describe the event, they might say something like, well, I was talking to my husband and he had an attitude and I didn't really appreciate how he was talking to me. Those are not facts. The fact him having an attitude is an interpretation. What exactly happened? My husband said good morning in a way that was quieter than normal. Okay, those are things you took in with your 5 senses. It's important for us to understand what we take in with our 5 senses and the difference between that and our interpretations. And this is where we start to break the interpretations down even more. Well, she looked at me funny. Describe it in words that are exactly through your 5 senses. She had a funny face. Describe it in words that you took in through your 5 senses. She has a face. The end. I'll never forget. It was one time I was on campus. I was trying to decipher, would I have chicken nuggets for lunch or a salad? I'm walking, I'm thinking hard about this, okay? Because this is a really important choice that you got to make at 9:30 in the morning, all right? I'm walking, I'm like, the chicken, but the barbecue sauce. So we get into the group room and my client's looking at me and she's like, you had an attitude this morning. Ma'am, what? I didn't even see you, first of all. I didn't see you, first of all. Second of all, I was having an infamous chicken nugget debate in my mind. That is why interpretations are so important. I have an RBF. Anybody know what an RBF is? I have a resting bee face. I'm from Brooklyn. You better look like you have a face and you know where you're going in Brooklyn. It's an automatic thing I do so nobody bothers me. People interpret it to mean something about me, but it's not always the truth. And this was the perfect example to work with that client on. Do you see how your interpretation made me upset with you when I didn't even see you coming into work this morning? So this is why the facts, when you ask them to describe it, take all that interpretation, take all the absolutes off, tell me exactly what happens. What are my interpretations, thoughts, and assumptions about the event? I interpreted that you were upset with me. I thought that you were mad at me. I thought that you rolled your eyes at me this morning. I'm really sitting there like, how did all of this happen? And I was trying to make it into work on my cup of coffee and trying to figure out, this is why it's so important. This is why the interpretations are important. Because if my face has you interpret anger, we have a cognitive distortion that says people are angry at me. So now we can have a conversation about the interpretation and not what was actually going on. So practice looking at all sides of the situations and points of views. Jelan is a weirdo. Jelan was probably thinking about a symphony in her mind. Jelan probably tripped on the way from her car to the office because she's very clumsy. What are some other points of view that we can have around this interpretation? Test your interpretation and assumptions and see if they fit the facts. In this situation, the emotion did not fit the facts. The emotion did not fit the event. Number 4 is huge. Am I assuming a threat? Label the threat. Assess the probability that the threatening event will really occur. Think of as many other possible outcomes as you can. In this situation, the possible threat was, I didn't like her anymore, right? So we labeled the threat. What is the probability of me not liking this person anymore? And again, when we're talking about people who've had labels on them for the last 15, 20, 25 years, the threat that people don't like me is a very real threat for people in their minds, right? But if we had the ability to test that, which she did, which we had a conversation, that's when you start to shake up the interpretation a little bit and you start shaking up the threat. What is the probability of that actually happening? Number 5 is huge. Imagine the catastrophe really occurring. A lot of times when our clients are catastrophizing, that is a cognitive distortion. We say, don't even think about that. Why are you even thinking about that? Come back down this way. No, let's talk about worst case. I don't like you anymore. Did the world end? Did you lose the ability to pay your bills? Did anything change about your life? Probably not. Worst case scenario, is that going to impact you that much? Imagine coping well with the catastrophe. That's important as well. When we're asking our clients not to think so big, we're not acknowledging the thoughts that are already happening for them. Let's say it did happen and I didn't like you. Let's talk about coping with that. Let's talk about coping with the fact that sometimes people may not like you. What does that coping look like? What does effective coping look like if in worst case, in the catastrophe, somebody doesn't like you? And number 6, does my emotion and or its intensity fit the actual facts? In this example, the answer is no. The reason why it's important to talk about intensity of the emotion is because in the example I gave earlier of my little child who threw the coat rack, in that example, we can acknowledge that the emotion of anger was appropriate. The intensity of the emotion was not appropriate. Does that make sense? So we can ask, does the emotion fit the facts? It might. Does the size of your emotion fit the facts? Those are 2 separate questions as well. Tell me more. I'm seeing kind of questioning eyes. I'm seeing folks having thoughts about that. Tell me what's going on when I say, does the emotion and intensity fit?
The intensity, I'm just, is that something that we can really control? I mean, it may not be, the intensity might not be, how do I want to say this? In your eyes, as big as it would be in somebody else's eyes. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so I have a hard time understanding how would I separate, I guess I would say, like what, it's not up to me what the intensity is, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah,
I can't say how you should feel or how big you should feel it. So I'm kind of like, have mixed emotions with that one.
Yeah, great point. Here's where it might be helpful. Our emotions impact our physical bodies. So if we can have the conversation around, that was a really, really big emotion for a small event. How do we work on bringing that emotion down for my client's sake, not for my sake, but because the emotional ramping up does so much to my nervous system that it exhausts me? Do I need to be having huge emotions every time something happens? Does that affect me well? That's a piece of it. I'm not talking about appropriateness. I'm more so talking about when somebody does this and you have this emotion in your body, Do you need to have that much emotion in your body? How is that effective for you?
So it's more about controlling the emotions so it doesn't get out of control and bigger than it needs to be. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Right. It's more about, every time somebody doesn't say good morning to me, do I need to have a big emotion about that? Or can I have a conversation with myself about how I interpret it so I can bring that emotion down a little bit for myself? Because like we were saying, once the emotion gets above a 6, now we're in distress. If I go into distress every time somebody doesn't say good morning to me, I need to be working on my interpretation.
So would this apply more so to the reoccurring event?
Yeah.
As opposed to just a once in a while thing, like a
Yes.
one, that one time situation.
Yes,
Okay.
a reoccurring event,
Okay.
or the same interpretations for multiple events.
Okay.
Because what we notice is that our clients are reliving the same things over and over in different aspects of their life. So it might not be the same behavior per se, but it's all coming from that interpretation of the world that nobody likes me.
Okay. Yep. I gotcha. Okay. Yep.
That makes sense?
Yeah, now it does.
Thank you. I love the questions. I love the feedback. So this is a really great exercise to do. I also do, when I do this, I do situations where the emotions do fit the facts. And that's another piece where you get to validate the emotions. Your emotion was right on target. Your emotion intensity was right on target. Then we can separate what's a more effective way to express that emotion. So once you start doing this work and you start talking about language with clients, then the more you do it, somebody will say something and you say, did you check the facts? And you start to really have them work it into their daily lives. If you have clients who are invested, I give my clients homework. I've had folks walk around with the DBT manual and like pull it out at CBS and be like, okay, fits the facts. Okay. Because a lot of our folks really are visual learners. A lot of them, I'd have people in the next skill I'm going to teach is, before we finish up, is cope ahead. I'd have people with worksheets in their back pockets going into holidays to deal with their families, right?
If it works,
we're going to go for it.
Yeah.
I'm one of those people of, if it works, we don't need to break it down anymore. If it works, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a first aid kit.
Yes. Literally, yes. So check the facts here. There's more information. And what I love about DBT, we're not just going to tell you about a theory. We're not just going to tell you about a skill. We're going to give you steps on how to break that down and do that. So either you can break this down by yourself or you can do it with the client. And I guarantee you, if you can do it with the client and start to help them understand these patterns, because a lot of our folks have been in the same pattern for years. These are huge pattern interrupters. Yes, Jennifer.
Once again, I agree with you, the huge pattern interrupters, because what we're seeing is first, the behavior is intensified for a minimal situation. It just goes off the chart with the behavior. And then you go back and you work with them and then you try to analyze with them. I'm not going to use analyze with them. I'm going to use a more appropriate word. You analyze with them the sequences and what led and how it contributes to what happens when they're not in our residence. So then the next time they do it, they come to you and they're like, oh my goodness, Ms. Jennifer, which I don't like them calling me that. Oh, this time I didn't go off the chain. I was able to identify it at this point and stop the behavior. And when you do that, you kind of like reward them with good job. Oh, tell me how that worked out. And not only, it's like, now they're seeing the first encouragement that they probably have never saw before. They're seeing that encouragement. And as they see that encouragement, the next time the same behavior happens in a different circumstances, they're able to identify it. They're able to halt, which I say is like the yellow sign on a traffic light. They pause and then they're able to like identify, hey, I'm not going to do this because I always do this when this happens. And then they come to you again to analyze it. And the more they understand how the event equals the emotion equals the body language, equals the interpretation, whether false or true, and then equals the, I say problem behavior, but I think I'm going to change it once I have heard you speak. They see that problem behavior and they're able to start with one behavior, then two behavior, and it's not going to be successful, you know, everything finished by the time they leave, but they have the model that they need to use when they leave in order to facilitate more appropriate and effective way to manage their life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it does look like that. It kind of looks like a chain of events where they try something different and that works, and they go back in and start to rework it, and it's starting to look and feel different. And then they start to see the changes in those patterns, like you were saying. Absolutely. I love when my folks come in, I'm like, you use the skill. I get excited. They used to call me the social work cheerleader. I have no shame in that. I will sing a song, I'll do a dance, because it is my passion to watch people break patterns. And it ain't about me, because like I tell my clients, I get paid whether you change or not. I love you, but okay. But the passion is to see the shifts start to happen for them. And for them to say, it took me 10 times the energy to engage in this emotional loop and pattern and behavior and consequence than it did for me to understand, oh, my interpretation is off. Let me take a step back and figure out what else I'm gonna do. It takes 10 times the energy and time to engage in those ineffective behaviors. That's another piece of it. It's like, you just riled yourself up, got upset, got a consequence. Meanwhile, we can shift that and start to change the way that looks. That's huge. The last one I want to talk about. Okay, the last one I want to talk about is our cope ahead. Now, we use the cope ahead when we know difficult situations are coming up. That could be holidays. That could be anniversaries, that could be birthdays, that could be any time we can anticipate a difficult situation coming up. It's like a little game plan. So we use this game plan a lot for holidays. We use it a lot for people who are sober and maybe entering spaces where there'll be substances. It's when we know something's going to happen, we can come up with a game plan together. So the first thing we do is describe the situation that is likely to prompt the problem behavior. I use an example. One of my folks going to family's house for Thanksgiving. There's going to be substances there. There's going to be lots of food, lots of people, lots of shit talking. Yes, I curse. And how do I go and be effective in the same environment that traumatized me, right? Step one, even before this, is, do you need to go? Do you have to go? Like, do you really need to be there? If yes, then we can come up with a plan. A lot of this, I like to use the term, this is not clinical at all, this is from my brain, the cauldron of trauma. If you can think about a big bowl of this trauma that was stewing up, when our clients are going back into their cauldrons of trauma, whether that be family, whether that be physical locations, this is a really good skill to use. The cope ahead. And this is the one that my folks will have this printout in their back pockets as they're entering the space for Thanksgiving dinner. So what is likely to prompt the problem behavior? I have an uncle who always likes to talk shit, and he likes to say things to rile me up. Every year before this, we've gotten into a physical altercation. This year, I'd like to have a different response to my uncle. So we're going to check the facts, which we just did. We're going to be specific in describing the situation. Uncle says something that is triggering to me, and I respond with a behavior. We're going to name the emotions and actions that are likely to interfere with you using your skills. And this, again, we map this out. We'll write all of this out together in a session before they go into the area that they're going into. Decide what coping or problem-solving skills you want to use in the situation. Another piece of what's important about DBT is we don't say all the skills work for everybody. If a skill does not work for you at that 1 to 5, we cross it out entirely. It is not helpful for you. What we don't want is somebody to be entering an unsafe space with a skill that doesn't work for them. So number 2 says, decide what coping or problem skills you want to use in the situation. You want to be specific. You want to write out in detail how you will cope with the situation and your emotions and action urges. This again is why it's important to map it out. You can even do the map we just did, the model of emotions. You can plan out a cope ahead on one of those too. We can map out everything that might happen or that's happened in the past. If your client has the ability to imagine yourself in the situation right now, not watching the situation, this is a great time for a role play. I can be Uncle So-and-so. I got a little bit of asshole in me. I can trigger you up real quick and we can go through the whole process together. If you have the room and space to do a role play, this will be a great time for it. And I did this one time in group. I became so-and-so's mom and I'm like, you gained a little bit of weight since last year, didn't you? Oh, no boyfriend again. And I'm sitting there and this person's getting triggered and I'm like, great, now we got something to work with. Let's map out what this is going to look like because you already know this person is going to say something to you. Let's map it out. Number 4 is rehearse in your mind exactly what you can do to cope effectively. Rehearse your actions, your thoughts, what you say and how you say it. Rehearse coping effectively with new problems that come up. And most importantly, rehearse coping effectively with your most feared catastrophe. Again, we want to acknowledge the catastrophe. We want to acknowledge what happens if it does take place. How do you cope effectively when it goes down, if it goes down? And then number 5, which is so important to me, is practice relaxation after rehearsing. I want to switch out the word relaxation for self-compassion. And this is when we talk to our clients about what self-soothe is for them. This is what we'd want to do. So when we do a cope ahead, we want to practice the self-soothe we're going to use after this interaction happens with the person. So we're going to map out the entire situation. We're also going to map out what happens when you get home that you can do that compassionate for yourself, because a lot of this emotional work is exhausting. Changing patterns is exhausting because it takes a presence and an awareness that you haven't had in the past because you've just been going with the punches, literally. Right. So after the event that we've coped for, are you going to go home and light a candle? Are you going to have your favorite meal? Are you going to watch a movie that you like? Are you going to take a warm bath? What does self-compassion look like for you after this event? Because we want to prepare them for the emotional stress of it and then show them what we do after we enter a situation that is emotionally stressful. We don't do a good job of helping people with the self-compassion after the emotionally stressful event. We don't do that with ourselves. Because as therapists, we really should be having a self-compassion practice at the end of each workday and the beginning of each workday. So we can even do that for ourselves as well of how are you going to let your body know that you're back in a safe environment? That's really what self-compassion is. How do you let your body know that you're now safe again? Because those things can rile you up for days and weeks. So that is our cope ahead. That is another skill that we use in DBT. In the interest of time, I am going to kind of just get some questions and comments. I don't know if you can tell, this is one of my favorite things to do / teach. Like I love DBT and I love emotion regulation. Throw some questions, comments, throw some stuff at me for the last couple of minutes. Tell me what you're going to take with you and what that looks like.
I absolutely loved this. This was just such a great informative session. I did learn a lot from this, the DBT, and I'm going to use it with my clients and hope to God my single dads are able to express themselves and understand where they're coming from and how they can talk with me and to other people in a better manner. Because I know they got it inside them. They just need to learn how to do that. So thank you so much for everything.
Thank you. Thank you. What else? Throw some stuff at me.
You ever have the 6 things you were talking about, the emotions, you ever had somebody not come back from it, like just it lingers and it stays there, like that ever happened?
What do you mean the 6 things? Like
Okay, the module that you were just showing on how something so small can be this big and then we have to think, you know, the perception, has it ever stayed impacted in a negative way? Like it just someone didn't come back from that.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had conversations about skills not working or not even getting to be able to use skills. Then we keep mapping it out until we figure out what works for that person. That's another thing about DBT. Then we're like, okay, the skills that we gave you weren't helpful. Let's go back to the drawing board with what might be helpful. So there's another piece of there's no shame of like, you did it wrong. It's more so about like, maybe that was my mistake. I thought this skill would be helpful. Let's work together to find you another skill that works. Even if you got to get up and get out the room, that is a skill that we can talk about. So it's all about problem solving when it comes to these things, as opposed to, I never go into these situations feeling like I'm an expert. That client has been living in their body for however long they've been alive. They are the experts. We're going to work together to figure out what's going to help them get their lives to where they want it to be. So absolutely, we've had times where they're like, Jelan, I ain't do what I was supposed to do. I slapped her. All right, well, we can start from the slap.
Thank you.
Yes. Anything else? Questions, comments, concerns? All right, folks, what I'm going to do, thank you, everyone, for participating, for being here. I'm going to put my website in the chat. If you would like, if your organization wants any kind of training or workshops, I'll put my website in the chat. And also, please check out